Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight...
This is the most successful shutdown ever in the history of struggle in South Africa.
Was it or was it not? Our panel of analysts weigh in on the EFF's national shutdown.
There was no any sabotage on the part of government. We just made sure that everybody plays by the rules.
The government, meanwhile, pats itself on the back for maintaining law and order during the EFF's protests. But was it all worth it? The Watchdog starts now. The EFF's second in command, Floyd Shivambu, addressed marchers at Eskom's headquarters in Megawatt Park a short while ago. The party has hailed their national shutdown as an incredible success.
We are so grateful to all the fighters of the EFF, the ground forces, that have patiently and in a disciplined way engaged in a necessary protest to demand the return of electricity and, of course, the resignation of the useless head of state called Cyril Ramaphosa. It was a very successful day, not only here in the march which started in Alexander up until here in Megawatt Park, the Eskom head office. Everywhere else where we were engaged in activities, it was a huge success, from literally in Musina to the Cape. Everywhere else the EFF exists, we had a serious impact. We said there's going to be national shutdown. Today, there was a national shutdown today. This shows that we're an organization that matters. We're an organization that is listened to by majority of the people here in South Africa. And of course, we had to come here in Megawatt Park. We're not going to conclude this protest without coming to Megawatt Park because we are demanding the return of electricity.
EFF Deputy Leader Floyd Shivambu outside Megawatt Park, where they held a protest about an hour ago or so. The party's leader, Julius Malema, has praised the bravery of the protesters who heeded his party's call for the national shutdown. He also urged South Africans not to tire to hold government accountable. Malema says today's march will go down in history, in the history books of this country. Leading to the march, the EFF leader decried President Cyril Ramaphosa's deployment of over 3,000 SANDF soldiers ahead of the shutdown. Malema says this was done to intimidate protesters, but it all failed. Monday's national shutdown is among the effort by the third largest party in parliament to get the president to resign.
The Red Beret, out in their numbers,
Be ready, South Africa. Ramaphosa will fall.
heeding the call to shut down the country. The party is protesting against the current status of the country. The EFF says enough is enough. Malema and his followers painted the streets of the capital city red.
Load shedding, unemployment, poverty, the crime, GBV in this country is out of hand, is out of control. Now, why do you want to sit comfortably as if things are normal?
Together with other organizations, they took their concerns to the citadel of power.
In this house of ours is the one who's privatizing Eskom, is the one who's selling Transnet, is the one who sold SAA in a dodgy dealing, is the one that is destroying state-owned enterprises.
Across the country, Malema ramped up political pressure while his second-in-command, Floyd Shivambu, took the demands to the doorstep of energy and the economic hub. Shivambu led a march from the dusty streets of Alexander to the richest square mile of the African continent, Sandton.
Wherever he is, Cyril Ramaphosa must step down as a matter of urgency. We want to save this country and take it to a proper direction.
In KwaZulu-Natal, the party also made its mark, but met its premature end as they were blocked by the police.
Speaking to
Also,
the order.
it's you who saying we must turn it.
Now you are putting words into my mouth.
I'm asking a direct question.
Yes.
So it's your authority that blocks the road for us to say we must not pass
My
it.
authority is quite simple.
No.
I am protecting the community.
From what?
In
From
terms
what?
of making sure that I can have this road to be open.
The mother city was also not left out. Other organizations also made their voice heard.
We've been waiting for this moment. It's long overdue.
Panze Karamaphosa Panze! Panze Karamaphosa Panze!
Cyril Ramaphosa and his failed government must go. That message is that we want electricity now.
We are here as PAC, we are part of this. We want Ramaphosa to go. We want load shedding to end.
The party's march also gained momentum in other provinces as party members heeded the call from its leadership to join in efforts to try and pressurize President Cyril Ramaphosa to resign. Ntlantla Khatlhane, SABC News.
Joining me now to weigh in on the EFF's national shutdown, I'm joined by political analysts Asanda Mwasheng and Ongama Mdimka. Good evening to both of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
The EFF leadership says it was the most organized, it went well, it was a huge success. Ongama Mdimka.
I don't know about huge, but I do think that today was a success all around. One, the profiling of the issues, and I think above all, the political communication to the state that says the status quo is not okay, is a necessary aspect of where we are. And in a system, Vuyo, it takes a butterfly flapping its wings somewhere, and the very act creates a tornado elsewhere. So to the extent that the EFF availed itself or conceptualized the march, and was the leading organization for it, my view is that it's taken issues that that South Africans are concerned about in general with the status quo. They may not agree with each of the demands that they were making, but the idea that the status quo is untenable and something must be done about it, for me, it's good that it was successfully again put on another platform, which is not a state-invited platform. And I think when I say successful all around, I think from a security and policing point of view, save for a few isolated incidents, it seems to have been successful on that front too.
Asanda Mwasheng?
I think, I agree with Ongama. I think it was a good, show up for the EFF. It wasn't as huge in terms of numbers as they used to, but it was a big deal because they made sure that we were talking about them the whole day. They were trending on Twitter and other social media for today and yesterday, and most of the past 2 weeks or since they announced. And so from a political messaging perspective, they have achieved what they wanted to achieve. We're sitting with South Africa right now where everybody's vying for the number 2 spot. Everybody is trying to make sure that when the ANC gets less than 50%, which it's likely to in 2024, that they are going to be the political party that is going to be in a position to become the kingmaker, because the ANC will be looking for alliances. And so these are the ways in which political parties do it. We saw the DA a month ago pull their own shutdown, wasn't quite as successful, didn't have quite as many numbers. But what is interesting and what I want to highlight for you is that in South Africa, we need to disabuse ourselves, my least favorite word, but I think it's important here. We need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that when it is Black people and a Black party that is protesting, that we start to use Swat-Khafarish language, that we start to use language that hankers back to the ways in which Black people striking was spoken about during apartheid. We saw a lot of this from the national government in terms of the statements they were sending out, and we saw a lot of this from the DA, which shouldn't be surprising. But the government also spent a little bit too much money for my liking, even though we know they have to balance ensuring that we don't have another July 2021. I don't think we needed as much security as we ended up getting. And I think specifically the government has to really be careful and think long and hard about the kind of language that they use and their ability to use state apparatus to quell any kind of dissent that they see. That was completely unacceptable in my view, and we should not as citizens allow that, and should not as citizens at any point support that, whether it's coming from the DA, who is the leading government right now in the Western Cape, or if it's coming from the African National Congress, who is the leading government nationally.
Well, the minister responsible for intelligence, who is also the minister in the presidency, but also cabinet spokesperson, was on our sister show Full View a little earlier. Take a listen to what Kumbuzo Njabeni had to say.
There was no any sabotage on the part of government. We just made sure that everybody plays by the rules. If you're going to carry protesters, you should know that your transport gets caught up in blocking a road and whatever. We're going to impound those, and they'll be part of exhibits. And then you know how it goes. The court can take 12 months, and the exhibits will stay in court in the compound, the police compound, for 12 months before you use the. So there was no such a thing. As government, we have to do our part to make sure South Africans are protected. We're not going to allow state resources to be used by hooligans wanting to disrupt the country.
That language. Ongama Mtimga?
So there is a little bit of careless language from the security, as well as, I guess, Fikile Mbalo is no longer in cabinet. But the rhetoric, for me, it sometimes did border on, sounding like political party speaking as opposed to the state. However, I differ slightly from my colleague's view. We have a recent experience with the riots, and so there could never be over-preparedness as far as I'm concerned for today. Because remember, while the rhetoric of EFF leaders sounds subdued today, and in fact, in the days before the march, I wouldn't put it past them that they may have actually been pushing for a more chaotic march than we saw. And this is something that they have shown on national television in Parliament. So today is as much a function of their choice in terms of responding to the public mood that they saw, as it was of the state's control and show of force, as it was of the moves, the attempt that the Democratic Alliance made to try and ensure that the EFF is responsible when it comes to its rhetoric towards the launch. So my view is that I would rather have the state, having spent the amount of money and deploying the amount of forces that it did, than to be caught napping again. However, I think what my colleagues are anxious about is that, because it's not just Asanda who's, is spoken along these lines, but many other political scientists. And the challenge is that once you have, the army out there, I don't know if they were, I didn't see them in many of the footage that I saw, things can go haywire or can escalate pretty quickly. So it becomes very difficult to control, issues, to control things and prevent, escalation of conflict. But I would still, given where we come from in recent years, prefer a state that for now is going to show to any groups that there's nobody who can claim a part of the territory of the state. Otherwise, we then gravitate too close to what we call state failure. When a state is unable to protect a part of its territory.
Asanda mentions Fikile Mbalula, and I was listening to some of his the things he said over the past few days, and including today, where he is one of the people who have actually been saying that the EFF were anarchists who were out to overthrow the state, and so on. And the iron was not lost on many people who saw Fikile Mbalula leading a march to the city of Tshwane only a few days ago.
Yes, I think that how I was contending with Fikile Mbalula's messaging, which was very much erroneous throughout, mostly, in fact, was that he's speaking at the level of the party. Where it became a challenge for me is when I was hearing the same message being repeated by government ministers. And I think that was trivializing. And in fact, so what was particularly concerning with what he was saying is in him dealing with the EFF as a political opponent, he was trivializing the issues. I can understand if they have differences about, nobody's going to call for the president to resign. But you can't trivialize load shedding. And also, in addition to the incongruency that you've just pointed to, that you lead a march, you're a governing party in the rest of the country, you lead a march, but you call out others who are in the opposition and are marching.
Just think, Asanda, is there justification, or what suggests, apart from statements that were made by several ministers, by Nat Joins last week, and so on, and you just heard Minister Nchabeni calling them hooligans only a couple of hours ago. Was there justification for all those utterances and the deployment, including the deployment of the SANDF?
I think South Africa sometimes suffers from this thing where, because we don't like the people who are doing the thing that we have to stand on principle on, we miss the point completely. And so I have had my own agreements with the EFF, and I will continue to have disagreements at points. But on this one, I think we are missing a critical thing, which is that we are seeing a president that has brought intelligence into the presidency. Number one. Number two, there was talk of an emergency, a state of emergency for electricity. Was that state of emergency or state of emergency state used to push through security responses, et cetera, that otherwise would not have been possible if we were not in such a state? This is the question we need to ask. How much money was spent, and what was the justification for the money spent? Because, you see, I hear Ongama, but here's where I have concern. If the government was speaking the way it has been speaking about this shutdown when the DA went to actually Lutuli House, they went to Lutuli House. They went to the provincial office of the ANC in Cape Town, and we did not see this. Fikile Mbalula was not making statements like this. And in fact, it was before Fikile Mbalula, Fikile Mbalula was not making these kind of statements. They were at his door. And you have the ANC that just the other day had its own protest. We did not see this level of deployment. And so South Africa is not a state that has been in the habit of over-preparedness. If they were, I wouldn't be raising the alarm at this point. I'm raising the alarm because it is when dealing with a particular party, opposition party, that they are doing this. And one of the things that people have pointed out, which I kind of sort of went about, was the fact that We often hear the Western Cape, the government of the Western Cape and the national government arguing about jurisdiction and so many other things when it comes to policing in the Western Cape. And for the first time in South Africa's history, we had very effective, very well coordinated national and local and provincial governance regulation around security. So why is it that when the government wants to achieve certain means, things can be done? Security can be coordinated nationally. Security can be coordinated between provincial and local arms. Strong language can be used, etc., etc. We shouldn't have to wait until it's the EFF protesting. If we are going to be this country that responds to protests like this, it shouldn't be only when it's the EFF. It should either be the norm or we need to question if, as a democracy, this is the direction that we want to take. We are a country on the continent of Africa where it is the usual norm for liberation movements, once they start to get close to 30 years of power, to start behaving in these ways. And I'm saying my alarm clocks are ringing, and we should not take this moment lightly, and we should note this moment. And as I said, the government has the very difficult job of ensuring that we don't have July 2021. I cannot underestimate that. I cannot pretend that that threat does not exist and it is not important for government. Government has that responsibility. Government, however, also has the responsibility to not use state apparatus to fight its own political battles, because when that happens, then we are on dangerous ground. We already have a president that has intelligence in his office. We already have a president that is sitting on an emergency and potentially used state of emergency rules that are actually there for electricity, by the way, and not for protest, that potentially were used today. And I want to know where they're used, how were they used, how much money was spent, and what were the justifications used, and do those justifications not exist when it comes to the DA a month ago and when it comes to the ANC a week ago. And then we can have a conversation about who we are and how we're supposed to respond to protests. Otherwise, to me, it just smirks of using the state's resources for fighting political battles. And that has nothing to do with the interests of South Africa. That has nothing to do with protecting South Africa. And that has nothing to do with delivering a better South Africa for all.
Do you think it was a coincidence, Ongama, that we didn't have load shedding this past weekend?
We've grappled with that question because we've had Eskom say, for example, that it's going to take about 2 years to resolve the problem as it is. Also, the chairperson of the board caused furore recently when he said that he was reported to have said South Africans should be, happy with the lower stages of load shedding. So then all of a sudden, you have no load shedding for a number of days. To me, I doubt that it was a coincidence. That's why, by the way, so from events, the system learns, right? It's not the fact that we're asking the question, if we could provide security in the way that we did, why can't it be done for the other problems that we face with gang violence, among other things? It's events who actually help us to be able to ask those questions. We talk, for example, in organizational development about learning organizations, that something gets to be done as a response to something, and it proves to work, and therefore becomes a learning moment, which then gets used going forward to influence how the general day-to-day or mundane activities get to be done. And I think that so yes, I'm saying whatever has been done in the last week to get us to have lesser stages of load shedding and have no load shedding at all, as well as what's been done from a security and policing point of view, should be reviewed and the question has to be answered. Why can't we have it every day?
Do you think we are owed an explanation, Asanda, as to what actually happened, why we didn't have load shedding at the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not surprising that it happened this way, because obviously the intent was to make sure that it looked like there wasn't a need for a protest around load shedding if there isn't load shedding on the weekend that the protest is taking place. So it's a very lame attempt to quell the fires or to make us believe that, the problem or the crisis is not as big as it is. And I think this is the mistake of the ANC. They always do this, where they miss the moment and they miss the temperature and the tenor and the anger of South Africans. That we didn't see as many people as predicted is not necessarily an indicator that people are not angry, that people are not outraged about what's happening with load shedding. The fact that you saw the deployment, by the way, is up until mid-April. And the reason for this is because the government has seen in France that a protest that started was one day ended up being 3 or more and more days. And so they were prepared for more than one day of riots. And in fact, I would argue they still are, because that, that kind of regulation is still in place until April. And so on one level, they know and are protecting themselves in terms of security. On another level, they're pretending like the impact isn't what it was. But of course, there's also the one thing that I do need to highlight, which is it's very difficult in some level to argue conclusively about this particular protest, because it happened to take place after a weekend before a public holiday. And we know many South Africans take leave on holidays, on days like this, and extend their holidays. And so there's a lot of that, in that people will know a lot of people were not going to go to work anyway. But there are organizations who have shut down, particularly because there were fears of what was going to happen. We saw, car companies particularly removing their cars even from the shop floor, because they were afraid of possible looting, as we saw in July of 2021. And so it is about us ensuring that as we have this conversation of how do we as a country secure such that looting, etc., and violence doesn't take place, and how do we ensure that we allow people to express their anger to its fullest extent? Because we cannot have order when our ANC government has disordered us and is making us live in chaos, and is making us live on a day-to-day basis of watching our state crumble in every single aspect. Whether you are talking about health, you are talking about energy, you are talking about, any and every indicator that you can think of is ringing such scary alarm bells towards a failed state, if not, arguably in a failed state. The levels of hunger in the Eastern Cape, the levels of poverty that 60% of South African children are growing up in poverty. That is an indictment on the political party that has been in power for 30 years. The fact that at the last election, South Africa had 42 million people who could have voted. 22 million actually registered, but only 12 million showed up. And so more than 40% of South Africans who had the ability to vote chose to stay at home and boycott the vote. We need to listen to those voices, and we need to figure out how do we make sure those voices end up at the poll in 2024, choosing somebody somehow who they think can lead us, because they clearly do not have confidence in the ANC. Otherwise, they would have gone out and voted for the ANC, such that the ANC gets the overwhelming majority in the numbers that it's used to. They also, by the way, didn't go out and vote for the DA, because the DA declined and has been in decline. And so South Africans are generally tired and are becoming apathetic about party politics. And this is yet another case in a lot of ways of politicking, where we are seeing a month ago the DA protesting, a week ago the ANC protesting, and now the EFF. And as South Africans, when we wake up tomorrow, our problems still sit. And none of the people, by the way, who have been involved in this have provided a single solution or an alternative to what they will do or what they are presently busy trying to do to solve these problems, and yet they have powers, legislative powers within as members of parliament, and as members of various committees and various structures of government in this country that have the ability to take us where we need to go.
The reason I was asking Ongama, I was asking Asanda whether she believes we are owed an explanation around the load shedding, our load shedding experience this past weekend, because it does also talk to the integrity of the people at Eskom. Because if indeed, as people suspect, this was done to water down, today's shutdown, then it poses serious problems for, the board and the executives at Eskom, that they can be used, for all nefarious reasons.
Well, I think it's important to leave it at the level of a question. In the week, I think before this one, last week, there was a message along the lines of, more power stations that had come on stream. And as a result of that, the energy availability factor had risen. This is subject to correction to about 70%. If that, I recall well the data on the media statement that they shared. So the bigger question that was in my mind was, were we duped? Was there a crisis being precipitated within Eskom in order to put a particular agenda? So that's one question which I was asking, based on the fact that more power stations or the generation capacity had reached levels which were last seen a year ago, according to Eskom. And then there's this issue of the load shedding that has subsided. Now, we do need answers, because the utility has been to the board where they explained how long it was going to take in order to resolve load shedding. And when, if there's an update on that, it needs to be answered, so that we are able to revise our expectations, but also to hold the power utility accountable, whether that holding of them accountable is happening through Parliament or the executive. So it's a pertinent question for me, especially given how much of a big crisis this is. If it happens, Vuyo, that this was a gimmick to try and create some basis for what otherwise was an attempt to quell a political storm, then it's an even bigger scandal, because it shows that the utility can be duped into, getting into the political fray. And if it happens that that is true, then the question becomes, why is a crisis of crippling the economy of the country less important than the political, quenching or responding to the politics of the day? Because then that's what the message would be. If they can do this ahead of a political event, but not do it in order to save the production hours that are lost by very important industries, including hospitals, then it would be a huge scandal.
And that's the question, isn't it? I believe we have quite a number of tweets. Let's see if we can do a bit of a selection. Rumit says, we are behind Mr. Julius, EFF national shutdown. We're tired of ANC-led empire of lies. Privatizing SOEs is the same as giving them to rich white people. It's that simple. This march, Matume says, was just a total fiasco. It never was supported. It never was supported to Malema's expectations and has failed to reach its intended purpose of removing President Ramaphosa. As for him claiming victory in load shedding, it's laughable because it's the Minister of Electricity busy at work. Mutende says we must not underestimate the power of a planted seed. The EFF is growing big in numbers and the majority of the youth are with them. The youth is the future. The youth is frustrated because of unemployment. That's where the danger is. Then Ayanda says, Vuyo, my main concern is that government looked at the July unrest, which for me was ANC versus ANC when looting happened. It was factions of the ANC which were fighting. Some wanted the release of Zuma and others were supporting CR. Just a handful, of the tweets that have come through. Let's squeeze in one more. Listening to Government Minister Nku Ntshavheni calling national shutdown protesters as hooligans is heartbreaking and a sign that my ANC is so arrogant. Asanda?
I mean, I think it shouldn't be coming as a surprise to us, the arrogance of the ANC. These are the same people who, at the height of the Jacob Zuma crisis, were telling us Abana Valo and dabbing everywhere they went in South Africa. And so this is just small stuff. I'm not surprised at all. This is classic ANC stuff. I think that, we underestimate sometimes the crisis that South Africa is in. We have a ridiculously high unemployment rate. And one of the reasons why I said the EFF has met its target is precisely because if you notice who fired the first salvo, it was young people who are university students in the Eastern Cape, WUSU students and other local, post-matric institutions. And then they were followed very quickly after that by young students in Hillbrow and Braamfontein. And then what you'll know is that the EFF has, over the past couple of years, been winning, by the way, many universities that previously used to belong to SASCO, and that previously used to sometimes even belong to the DA. And so the EFF has been sweeping up in terms of youth support. And I think this is exactly what they wanted. And they understand that while a lot of people underestimate going viral on Twitter as not a representation of South Africa, but it is indeed a representation of where the majority of young people spend most of their time. And so even if these young people didn't actually go out physically to support them, they were there on social media, listening and hearing the messages of the EFF more than they were listening and hearing the messages of the ANC. The ANC, by the way, which has not been able to deliver an ANC Youth League that is of sound mind since, and this is the irony of life, the very Julius Malema, who I would argue isn't necessarily the best example of youth leadership himself. But there it is. We are in a country with a governing party that has not made the effort to deliver solid youth leadership, even though the biggest ticking time bomb, even bigger than electricity to my mind in some ways, is that group of young unemployed people with nothing but time to think about how to make the state feel the pain that it feels on a day-to-day basis. And we have the ANC unable to deliver a youth leadership, unable to deliver a woman leadership. So the majority of South Africa is women. ANC Women's League in shambles. The other majority is young people. ANC Youth League in shambles. So we are beginning to see a new kind of politics, and the ANC is beginning to lose relevance. Look at the age of the people in Fikile Mbalula's march. By the way, we still call Fikile Mbalula, who is 50 plus, youth. Why is that? Youth in South Africa ends at 35. Look at the average age of the EFF supporters who are out today, and you will see that, the gray hairs are the past and the young people are the future, whether we like it or not. And that is what is going to determine the directions of the vote in 2024. And I fear that the ANC is completely missing the point, and they are not reading between the lines quite, as succinctly enough to be able to understand that we are watching their downfall. And whether it's going to be EFF or Action SA or any other of the multitude of political parties that are vying for that second slot, the ANC needs to get its act together and stop acting and using our state resources to fight their political battles. They need to actually govern and give us a year where people can perhaps think maybe we need to bring the ANC back. At this point, they are showing people and reminding people exactly why people need to ensure in 2024, when the elections start, that the ANC is the last thing that they vote for.
Quick last words from you, Ongama. Do you think today's protest by the EFF has done that party good?
I think it has, especially given the conduct as well. People, I battled to find people who were opposed to the march. Many people were supportive of the march. There were concerns about potential violence. I think particularly in the wake of reports that are going around about potential civil war in South Africa, you never know what people are looking at. So I'm happy that today the march happened to profile the issues that are grievances in the country. It was obviously never going to result in the president resigning, but the message the state has received is that the more it creates a permissive environment for national grievances to fester without doing something about it, the more space it's going to create for opposition parties who are not just going to play by the book in parliament, but are also going to explore whether they call it grievance, exploitation, whatever the case may be, opportunities to foreground people's issues. So indeed, if today is anything close to what Asanda was saying, the securitization of the state, as a governing party loses popularity, then it would be a cause for concern. But I'm saying that we definitely do need to get to a stage where the national security can be guaranteed, as much as the environment continues to exist for political expression.
Let me thank you so much for your time at Insights this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, maintaining law and order. What does it mean in the context of the things that happened today, but also what government did in the run-up to and during today's protest? That's coming up after the break. The heightened security for the EFF's national shutdown has drawn mixed views from various stakeholders. While some are criticizing it, others believe that it is justifiable. This follows the deployment of the South African National Defence Force to assist police in the prevention and combating of crime during this period and until next month.
On the eve of the national shutdown, President Cyril Ramaphosa informed Parliament about the deployment of thousands of soldiers at a cost of more than 166 million rand.
The employment of the South African National Defence Force for service in cooperation with the South African Police Service for the prevention and combating of crime, as well as maintenance and preservation of law and order in South Africa under Operation Prosper. 3,474 members of the South African National Defence Force have been deployed effective from 17 March 2023 to 17th April 2023.
However, there are those who are critical of too much security presence during the protests.
Yes, what we are seeing now amounts to wasteful expenditure because you have a security cluster that is deployed to an imaginary situation as part of a process of demonizing those who have decided to engage in this form of protest, this shutdown.
Those who support the presence of the men and women in blue, as well as soldiers, argue that the public is concerned about high levels of crime and violence, as well as destruction of property.
The police and the military were heavily criticized in 2021 for their slow and uncoordinated response. And I think for today's event, the security services were well prepared. They had more than enough early warning, and especially because of the limited and overstretched resources of the police. Deploying the military in support of the police, I think, is the sensible thing to do.
Security was also visible at the Cape Town leg of the protest, which ended up at the gates of Parliament. Authorities say it was necessary for security to be heightened to protect citizens of this country. Lula Mamaja, SABC News, Parliament.
Well, joining me in studio is Professor Klufelo Rakubu, who is the acting HOD at the Tshwane University of Technology's Department of Safety and Security Management. Evening, Prof. Thank you very much for your time. Lots of debate around whether it was necessary to deploy, in particular, the SANDF to go and assist the police. Your thoughts?
Good evening to the viewers. Yeah, lots of debate, and I think South Africa tapped into the history, particularly with the criticisms around how they handled the 2021 July unrest. So obviously to revive their integrity, because remember they were labeled incompetent, so they might have marginalized what tomorrow's event is about. And again, I don't blame them, because South Africa doesn't know a peaceful protest, particularly a politically motivated one, particularly looking into the level of lawlessness, high rate of crime. Any protest creates room for more violence and opportunistic criminals, because they see this as part of opportunity for looting, opportunity for all other sorts of crimes. However, it was costly. As costly as it was, it also set a particular precedent. Now South Africa cannot come in to tell us about their inability to assist when it comes to GBV and all other crimes. This precedent and police visibility tells us that South Africa is capable. If you are able to put financial muscles to tap into political space, then we also know that you are capable. You are not going to tell us any other story. So you must respond accordingly when it comes to issues of crime. Those funds could have been utilized somewhere else.
But then what about the argument that is often made that soldiers are not trained,
yes,
for the kind of role that they had to assume today and may assume going into the future, given what the president has asked Parliament,
yes,
has told Parliament?
Yes, they are not trained. That the decision tells us that whoever is in power is cognizant of the fact that law enforcement, particularly SAPS, is incapacitated when it comes to issues of crime. It's not on par with issues of crime. But when it comes to recruitment phase, they don't recruit as per crime level in South Africa. That is why now they have to tap into SNDF, which is unnecessary, because they are not trained to deal with these kinds of protest. Now, what they should do is to assess thoroughly level of criminality and recruit as per level of criminality, because obviously today certain stations did not have police officers, because all were supposed to go and attend to political squabbles, all were supposed to go and respond to political game and play political game, because like I said, crime is political. So that victim of rape today was not assisted because resources have been diverted to respond to whatever suits a certain political party. Someone's decision to report was halted because they were not available today. All roads led to the protest, and South African allowed, the ruling party allowed. There was a loophole. Their ineffectiveness and lack of responsiveness allowed that today more re-victimization, more secondary victimization took place because there was no any other assistance except to police people that had democratic right to protest. But it looked like they don't have that. They have to be policed. But when you police, you take away from people that deserve those resources. So today, South Africans brace themselves to see police vans that they've never seen before, helicopters running around. Why can't we have those when we are crying about illegal firearms and illegal immigrants or gun violence and issues with gangsterism? Because the same energy can be deployed somewhere else where necessary. So today, our police officers are going to receive certain incentive just to be part of a protest because a certain political party took a particular decision. So it's costly. Now, the next quarter, we're going to receive crime stats. Are they going to tell us they don't have money?
As far as you know,
yeah.
But also because, dealing with curriculum issues and so on. Are these conversations actually taking place? In other words, do the people who are in charge, actually have these conversations that we need to change tech, we need to train people this way and not the other way, we need to deploy according to the challenges that we are facing. Do these conversations even take place?
They will say it does. However, I don't believe it because if they do have such conversation, then there's lack of political will. There's lack of political will because the muscles are there. We didn't even know we have such millions available within 1 week to attend to this.
Yeah, because one would have thought that schools like yours or people like you, being academics who are in this field, would be roped in to say, what is your thinking? Let's put ideas on the table. What are the challenges that we're facing and how do we overcome them?
We do produce.
So in other words, you should be having it, or should be able to even say to those in charge that, look, this is the body of knowledge we've been able to produce, which you think will help you in your planning, but also in how you strategize.
We do have researchers available and for South African leadership to take into consideration. If you check with the employment or recruitment of SAPS members, for example, to show lack of cooperation and understanding. We do teach policing, for example. We produce policing graduates, but comes recruitment phases, they don't even tap into universities to check how many you've produced. They will just go in and take someone who studied agriculture, for example, who's sitting at home due to unemployment and come become a police officer. They don't have interest in being a police officer. It's a circumstantial decision. So if they considered institutions of higher learning, they will be having police officers who went to school to study to become police officers. So there's lack of cooperation, understanding. We produce what they don't take because for example, no policing graduates should be sitting at home as we speak, looking at the magnitude of crime level in South Africa. They should all be employed and we will be able to respond effectively to calls of this nature because of political instability. Now, police minister will be saying we are short of 600 recruits. Then university, when you check the statistics, they're graduating more than 3,000. Why don't you tap into that and receive the right product that has gone through the process, that took a decision to study policing, not those that are sitting at home and all of a sudden they think they can be police officers and they don't want to be police. It's circumstantial. Then that is when we have issues of corruption, lack of understanding, poor morale, right? And greediness, because this is not my space. Then that one who studied policing is sitting at home. Comes time for this protest, that frustrated graduate is going to support Julius Malema, is going to vandalize property because of anger and frustration, status frustration as well.
Prof, let's leave it there for this evening. Thank you very much for coming through. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our show for tonight. Do join us again tomorrow evening, Human Rights Day. Until then, have a good night.